on your SDR. I'm just wondering what you're seeing as far as the transmitted bandwidth, because I said to this fella by email, I said if it was really a problem, you should have dropped down to the frequency, let me know, and I would have, cut back on the high frequency boost, because I really do boost the highs. I'm a strong believer, like we were talking last week, that once, my signal takes a trip through the other guy's receiver, that's where really a lot of the brilliance in the audio is lost. And plus, of course, this microphone I use, which is an RE27, it has a natural presence boost beginning about, I think, 1 kilohertz. I forgot how many dB it peaks, I think around 3 or 4 kilohertz. So, you add that to like the 6 dB boost that I have within those bands, and I'm really boosting the highs. But again, there's a difference between boosting the highs in the mid-band and then letting, the sibilants, which are really the high-frequency components, pass through the transmitter. So I'd be curious, Frank, as to what you're seeing at your end. W2SDR and the group. This is W2XR.
W2XR and the group, W2SDR. Okay, well, what I'm seeing is you have a lot of energy out to about 6K. And after that, it gradually rolls off, maybe about 6 dB less, around 8K. So that's what I'm seeing here. It's a gradual roll. It's not a brick wall like you're seeing with me, pretty much. Because, this is an SDR and it's got the DSP bandwidth limiting. So, people use terms IMD, he probably is using the wrong term. I don't know what he was hearing, okay, because I didn't hear it. But that's what I'm seeing here. It's I don't see anything much out past 8KC audio bandwidth, but I mean, you're strong, but if you were even stronger, of course, I would see more out there because, there's a slope, okay? But there's no distortion factors. There's no buckshot. There's none of that, okay? And I think that's fine. Now, mine would be 6 kilohertz out, and then it drops like a stone, pretty much. You have much more out there than, well, not much more. You have a little bit. You have a little bit of a slope after this 6KC. Okay, I don't have any of that slope. So I listen to you on all different bandwidths here, from 6KC plus or minus 3, okay, up to plus or minus 8. And you sound good at all those bandwidths, which is an accomplishment. And that's exactly what someone would want. And so do you, Jerry, is that you sound very nice audio sound on just about anybody's receiver. And that should be the target. You shouldn't need somebody with a 15 kilohertz filter so will capture, that you will sound good on. My opinion, the compromise target of sounding good on everybody, with everybody's receiver, is what you should aim for, and both of you guys do that. Yeah, I have an RE27 also. It's a great mic. Really, the only thing it's good for is announcing, in my opinion, because you just cannot EQ that peak out for anything else. But that's what it's designed for, and it does a great job. It's a great microphone. As far as my signal goes, I use an LD MOS amplifier, which I think is very important. It's got 2 of the 188 XRs in it, which each rated at 1,500 watts. And I'm running at 270 watts of carrier, peaking at about 1,200. So it's a lot of headroom. So the amp is loafing at this. And the LD Moss amplifier, this particular amplifier, has got very, very low distortion. So I think the combination of running everything well within its limits with lots of extra headroom is the key to a clean signal in everybody's technology, whether it's tube technology, solid state technology. Headroom is what it's all about. So, you don't want to run anything right up to the limit, I think I commented on everything. Oh, and some of those, what this radio can do, what this software can do is I could email the transmit profile. Not just clone, I could email it to somebody and they can import it. As far as some of the bad recordings go, it could be, the equipment all out there is great. I don't think they make anything that really sounds bad today as far as equipment, but you got bad producers, and all this audio stuff is very subjective on top of that. So you got somebody that has a tin ear and it's just he's mixing something or producing something right in the zone that you hate. But the guy next to you, boy, does that sound good. So there you have it. Over to you, David. If you're not there, I guess it goes, because I think David was going actually for an early dinner tonight. It goes to Jerry. But I'll try David anyway. N9PVF in the group, W2SDR. Oh, and by the way, let me just say one more thing. Jerry, whatever you've done to that audio, I think from top to bottom, it's an improvement. I really like the way it sounds.
Very delicious stir-fried pork and cabbage. It's one of my favorites. She's getting off the keto diet today. She actually is great. Anyway, very interesting about all the different aspects of being able to hear what it sounds like and being able to use technology to do that. And, I know what I'd like, but do I understand how to tweak technology to do it? I'm still trying to figure out how to find a way to make a microphone invert the phase on the 726 Pro. I actually know what I should do, but I ordered parts and the 600 ohm isolation transformers are out of stock. Go figure. W2FNQ and N9PVF. So I'll be out for at least a half hour. Adios, amigos, N9PVF.
Okay, David, did you hear my comments? I'm sorry, I might have doubled a little bit with David. Did you hear my comments, Jerry?
Yeah, I got your comments. Thanks a lot, man.
W2SDR and N9PVF. W2XR, W2FNQ. What I did was I came up on the I came up a hair. I came up a hair on 960 hertz band, and I came up a hair on the 3.5 kilohertz band. There's nothing in between there. And I just came down on the 60 hertz band, which I had does the job. It's still gonna, here comes the oil burner. It's still gonna, I think, do its thing with the oil burner, but maybe not as bad.
Oh, yeah, it does it.
I did have a way. Wait a minute. Hang on 1 second. Let me try something.
Yeah, I can really hear that oil burner back there.
Nah, that doesn't help. Alright. I used to be able to press a button and null out the oil burner, but anyway. And to answer your question, Bruce, yeah, if you hear a little reverb in there, it's there, but it's way, way down compared to what it used to be, and I think I may want to drop it just a hair. I'm sure they're doing it. Put a compressor in there, and it keeps in the audio. And people think that, yeah, man, that's good. Distortion in the bass, you know, it's like, no. Yeah. W2XR, W2FNQ.
Yeah, is there a braking station? There was a powerful carrier on there before. Braking station, go ahead. This is W2XR. Now, maybe just some deliberate QRM. W2FNQ in the group from W2XR, very good. Yeah, it sounds better, Jer. I really like it like this. I would ask, if it's not an imposition, if it's not inconvenient, if you could just literally patch out that reverb. The reason why I ask is I do hear a little bit of the effect in there, but I guess where I'm really going with this is those things, if I remember, rely upon a bucket brigade technology, and they can introduce a lot of distortion. So I'd like to hear what it sounds like without that thing, if you can just patch around it, if that's possible. But it does sound good, and I could certainly still hear the oil burner when it kicked on. So you still do have, you know, that powerful, pardon me, extended low frequency response. And Frank, thank you very much for that, the comments about what you're seeing on the waterfall. Yeah, that pretty much confirms what I suspected. I'm about 6 dB down at 8 kilohertz, which is exactly where the relative to the 8 kilohertz slider is to the 6.3 kilohertz slider. It's a 6 dB difference. And if it really is annoying to the other station, I'll just drop that 8 kilohertz all the way down to minus 12 dB, and that should hopefully do it. But yeah, I think it's strictly just a accentuated high frequency response of this rig and the way I have it set up. And it's good to hear there's no buckshot. I'm not coming close to the baseline. I have it set up that way. I rely upon the asymmetric capability of the Enovonics 222. Let this thing go as high as it wants in the positive direction, which is actually up to about 130, 135% thereabouts. But only occasionally will I hit the 95% indicator on my mod monitor. In fact, it looks like if I wanted to, I could probably even crank up the audio by about a half a dB. There we go. Still a little bit louder. Now I just hit the baseline. I don't want to do that. Okay, we'll leave it where it is. It's been set that way for years. You know, it's interesting, too, about the whole concept of intermodulation distortion with linear amplifiers. I don't know, Frank, if your linear has what's called pre-distortion. I'm sure you're familiar with that concept. It's not that new, but it used to be done in the analog domain. Now I think it's done with digital sampling and correction. And obviously, what it does is it looks at any nonlinearities, or I guess within the transfer curve of the RF input to the RF output, and it analyzes the transfer curve, or the deviation in the ideal or best fit transfer curve, and then obviously it compensates to create a best fit straight line, and that's the linearization that takes place. And I've heard that using pre-distortion, you can see third-order distortion products, third-order IMD on the order of like minus 50 dBc, which is amazing. I mean, there was a time when maybe 35 dBc was considered spectacular for an amateur radio amplifier. Grounded grid. But 50 dBc to get a 15 dB improvement, that's phenomenal. And then the other thing is, too, I remember reading just a couple of years ago, talk about the record production business. I would certainly agree, Frank, that the quality, the technical quality of the hardware that's out there now is the best it's ever been. Nobody's going to dispute that. In terms of the linearity of mic preamps, bandwidth, sampling rates that are available for recording in the digital domain, 24-bit, 192 kilohertz sampling. I mean, it's literally a transparent recording medium nowadays. But I remember reading that what a lot of the record producers are doing, particularly for rap music, which I don't listen to, they're actually using optimods. They're using multiband processors with the clipping and, of course, the AGC to make the records or their recording sound as loud as possible. Now, with rap music, I don't think that fidelity, technical quality, is really the key parameter that the producer is looking for. If they're looking for loudness, there's no question that's a good way to do it, that's for sure. But to use an optimod for professional recording, that's a new one on me. I'm trying to find an XLR male-to-male adapter I have here because I'd like to patch in my RCA 77D. That's an old ribbon microphone, and believe it or not, it has the WOR placard on it. You guys were talking about WOR earlier, you and Dave Jerry. W2FNQ, and I'm sorry, Frank, I think you get it rather, I beg your pardon. W2SDR in the wilds of South Jersey, and the group. This is W2XR.
Yeah, ribbon microphones. W2XR in the group, W2SDR. I heard that the very tail end when I tuned in about the WOR. I know their transmitter site, their old one anyway. I used to pass on the Garden State Parkway, I believe. I think they had multiple towers at that time, but it's hard to remember. So I didn't get the whole gist of the QSO back then. But, yeah, ribbon microphones, they're quite the thing. Wow, that's a cool mic. Be cool to hear that. Well, when you mention optimods in the recording studio, that Innovonics 223 that I have has got a mode in it that's 20 to 20K that they claim in the... or they tout, let's put it that way. In the operating manual, you could use it in the recording studio. Now, it's got pre-emphasis in there. It's got multi-band compression. In other words, it's like or-band sound in a recording studio for loudness, because it's got all the functions of that processor, but wide frequency response. And they say in the book, in the owner's manual, for recording use. So there you have it. I mean, that's proof of the pudding right there. This, the Anon software has pre-distortion in software. That you can get those IMD products like you had mentioned, Bruce, as far as that IMD goes, which I'm not using it right now. But this amp, the LD Moss amp, has very, very good IMD performance. And I use pre-distortion. A few anomalies as far as positive peaks and stuff on AM that I prefer not to use it. It sounds fine, but I just prefer not to use that. Before I forget, the oil burner, I think it does cause a little intermod because that tremendous bass is probably, I don't know if you have a mod transformer. I would think you do, Jerry, that it's causing some swamping of that. which is doing something to the higher frequencies. But I mean, we're splitting a lot of hairs here. I don't hear any reverb, but that's a good point. You know, it's good to maybe to take it out and see whatever Bruce is hearing. Now, in my voice, naturally, I have a big null between 800 and 900 hertz. That's evident on anybody's pan adapter or spectrum analyzer, but that's just my voice. And I don't try to boost it unnaturally. I just leave it the way it is because I feel that it's a characteristic of my particular voice, and it just stays that way. Before I forget, though, what's important is the alcohol comments. I forgot to mention the last time. Vanilla seems to be an additive in a lot of spirits today. I've had some vanilla Crown Royal, which is, you know, regular blended Canadian whiskey. It's very, very popular. Also, Fireball. Part of my bar is always a big bottle of Fireball. I don't know for the real spirit aficionado, but I'll tell you, it's a great whiskey to put in a flask is Fireball. You know, to take, you know, on road trips, there's nothing like Fireball in a flask. It's really tastes very popular down south. Very popular everywhere, actually. So it's great that you mentioned Fireball. Maybe Jerry, you know, as soon as that oil burner comes on, you should take a shot of that Fireball. What do you think, Jerry? Over to you. W2FNQ in the group, W2SDR. Hope the band's holding up.
Yeah, you're strapping in here, Frank. It sounds good. Sounds real good. W2SDR and W2XR from W2FNQ. Boy, I'm not the drinker I used to be, Frank. I actually, well, hey, you got to go back to where I was working in, well, I guess it was the late 70s, early 80s, and my boss was a drinker. And, you know, I did keep up with him. And continued into my next career. And I don't know, but now, these days, I hit the gin every once in a while, believe it or not. I used to be a Scotch drinker. And so was my dad for a while. It was cool when, oh God, this was many years ago, when I was still living with my parents. They had a bar down the basement, and my dad was on the road Monday through Friday. He'd come home Friday night, change into his comfortable clothes, and head down to the bar. And I'd follow him down, and you know, we'd set up a couple of drinks, and my mom would come by, and she'd have a drink, and then the next door neighbor would come by and bang on the window, and he'd come in and have a few drinks, and before you knew it, they had a party going on. Oh, man. So anyway, yeah, here comes the oil burner again. I don't know what's getting overdriven. Bruce will tell you. I think I over-designed the low end to the audio driver by a bunch. And I think there's probably some stage in there that's getting driven to the max. You know, probably one of the experiments I should try is just dropping the input to the transmitter and raising the modulation, and that would clear this. Of course, the furnace rumblings aren't all that clear and clean as it is, but whatever. If it's a little bit better, That's good. Anyway, well, first I'll wait till that thing stops back there, and I'll take the reverb out. I barely have it in. So it shouldn't be really obvious. And by the way, if you take a listen to WABC sometime, they got the reverb back on. It's like Bloomberg level. You can just barely hear it. But it's interesting to note that they put it back on. Yeah, frankly, I wonder if you can see all the Walking Guard thing. I know they're right next to the New Jersey Turnpike. And so was their old site, actually. They got the biggest towers of all out there. I think they're like 5/8 wavelength. They're huge. And it's kind of cool. Unfortunately, the old site, I think, had more class and more feel to it because they had an old Continental 317 with the peekaboo windows on it, and it was nice, you know. And they had a Harris DX50, which is basically a box. But the new site has two Harris 3DX50s, and basically two big boxes. You know, transmitters today don't have the soul that the old ones had. Anyway, let's try something here. This is with the reverb in, and this is with the... Yeah, there we go. This is with the button. Let's take care of that, and power J back in. I wonder what you heard. I can't hear much in the monitor. Not as much as the reverb in the monitor. Let's try here. Yay. Yeah. Yay. 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 Yeah. Anyway. That's basically it. The other day I turned down the pot when he said, can you cut out the reverb? And I realized, turned down the pot, turns off the other two microphones in the studio. Left and right mic. Anyway, now I'm hearing the noise from the basically the water flowing through the pipes. Weird. For the heating system. But anyway. Yeah. This is like their fourth transmitter site before this one. They were in Lyndhurst. Literally down the road from where they are now. You know, they moved because New Jersey is trying to improve the swampland out there. And where one of their towers, I think it was like the ninth hole in the golf course or something like that anyway. And then before that, they had a really unique transmitter site down in Carteret. There was two big self-supporting towers, and it looked like there was a dipole strung between them, but it wasn't. They had a line strung between them, and then they dropped the metal cable down, and the metal cable was actually used as it was the third tower. Well, it would be the second tower actually, and so they had a 3-tower array with 2 towers. But when you went by there, you went, "What the hell is that? Is that a dipole?" You know? But nah, it wasn't. That was a cool sight. But anyway. And then before that, there were Dan Burgers in Newark. Anyway, let me pass over to Bruce. I think there was something else I was supposed to comment on. Oh, yeah. Hey, Bruce, by the way, back to 2 subjects ago. I'm getting 10 kilohertz up from you. Talking to Ted, and no problem. I don't know, you know. Beats the hell out of me. W2XR. W2SDR. This is
W2FNQ and the group from W2XR. Yeah, I mean, again, I want to do the right thing. If I'm creating any kind of interference to another station that's 10 kilohertz up or down the band, you know, it's a simple thing for me to cut the high frequency boost on the graphic EQ. And as I say, not to belabor the point, the fellow was diplomatic about it. He was very good. We all, I'm sure, run into situations where we've gotten complaints, and the way the complaint was tendered was somewhat less than diplomatic, and people tend to get defensive in a situation like that, but there was none of that. So I appreciate that, Jer. I'll leave it just the way it is. I've never had really, I shouldn't say never, it's been years since I had somebody, for lack of a better term, complain about the transmitted bandwidth. And then I remember somebody made a complaint, and then the guy actually came back to me and he said, no, you're not splattering. I apologize. It's just, I guess you have an extended bandwidth as far as your frequency response goes of the transmitted signal, and all was fine. So there you go. Fireball. I wish I had one right now. Now, if I'm not going anywhere next Saturday and I've got this rig on the air, Frank and Jerry, I will have a nice glass of Fireball here with me. That is really good stuff. And apparently it's become extremely popular. I didn't know it was very popular in the South, Frank, like you had mentioned, but it's great whiskey. And again, we were introduced to that stuff at a party that my wife and I went to a couple of months ago. And I said to my wife's cousin's husband, I said, this is really good stuff. Let me take a picture of it on my phone. And then that week we went to the liquor store and I bought a fifth of it. So there you go. Yep, I hear my wife just came in. The mighty Janet just came in the door. And where is the WOR transmitter now? Because I take the New Jersey Turnpike relatively frequently when my wife and I go to visit my sister, who lives in northern New Jersey. And we pass right through the Meadowlands, of course, where a lot of those AM transmitter sites are located. So I'm wondering if we're actually passing by the WOR site. Be curious. And it's interesting, too, Jerry, what you had mentioned about that steel cable that was suspended between the two end towers. I think I remember reading not too long ago that the first directional AM station here in the United States was actually, I think, in Tampa, Florida. And I think it was to protect, oh gosh, it doesn't even matter. But at any rate, the technology had never been proven, and the station management had to be persuaded by the consulting engineer that, yes, this should work. Again, it had never been done on a large scale. It was a 5 kilowatt non-directional daytime station. No, I'm sorry, 24-hour station. And the performance of the directional array actually exceeded the engineer's expectations. And that kind of paved the way for directional stations in the AM band here in the U.S. And what it did was, after the war, when AM radio experienced this huge growth, was largely due to the new stations coming on the air that used directional antenna arrays to protect other stations on or near their operating frequency. And where I'm going with this, if I remember correctly, hold on one second. We're doing fine. If I remember correctly, WOR may have been one of the first 50 kilowatt stations to go with a directional antenna. And I think it was to protect a station up in Toronto. I doubt if it was CBL, because CBL is on 740, and WOR, I think, is on 710. But at any rate, that cable that was suspended between the two end towers, like Jerry said, that was actually intended to be a radiator, and the other two, the outlying elements, the end towers, were to actually create the pattern. So that's very interesting. I don't think anybody does that anymore. I think they rely upon, if it's a 3-tower directional array, 3 discrete towers, of course. But interesting stuff. How's that Manhattan doing over there, Frank? Where are you now, percentage-wise? 20% down, 50% down? Or we could convert that to dB. Are you 3 dB down or 2 dB down or what? And let's see if David is back from dinner. W2SDR and the group. This is W2XR. And I meant to comment about the pre-distortion in your transmitter, Frank.
I drug my feet a little bit there. No David yet. W2SDR. Before I forget, what's all the fascination with WOR? How did that come up? Does somebody work for them or what? You know, that's within range of me since I grew up in Philadelphia. I could always hear it. I love some of the programming on WOR. Rambling with Gambling in the mornings. It was a great, great radio station on many levels. But the programming is highlighted in my mind. Now, I'm not going to claim that I knew this, okay, because a lot of people say, you know, they have a computer in front of them and they have the answers to everything. I'm going to say that I looked it up. I will admit that. They have 3 towers, 2 directional, 2 patterns, 1 day, 1 night. And they're off the New Jersey Turnpike, just south of the Meadowlands. And that's where I remember seeing those towers. So I didn't see any other location. I don't remember any other location other than that, okay, that I've seen. But I've been listening to the WOR. I mean, when I was a kid, I'd have it programmed in, you know, the push buttons, you know, where you, in the car, the AM radio, you pull the button out and you push it in to store it. WOR was always one of my presets. That, WABC, of course, rock and roll, and a couple of at that time, one of the rock and roll stations in Philadelphia. But they were definitely presets. And the old pull the button out, push it in, memory store function of those AM radios. Man, I'm really showing my age here. But it's not bad, because everybody's old in this outfit, pretty much. And I'm on, like I've got 90%. I'm only down a fraction of a dB on this Manhattan. This is my second one. The other one's killed. Okay, so there you go. So guys, let me know what the whole thing is with WOR. Why are we like on that station? But like I say, that's their issue now. So they have quite a history, and I guess they're pretty narrow bandwidth now. As I recall listening to them on the SDR, they're down around 4.5 kilohertz because I think they have a subcarrier. I guess high definition or something going on there. I think they're high definition, or the last time I tuned in, they had definitely something going on. So back to you up there, Jerry. And I couldn't hear any difference here with the reverb in or out. But that may be band conditions. W2FNQ in the group W2SDR.
Okay, Frank. W2SDR. W2XR. This is W2FNQ. Nope, that's perfect. That's the way I want it. You can't hear any difference. I can hear it here. I can hear it in the audio that goes to the transmitter, or you know, I also hear it in the mod, the wave. amplification and videoing back and forth now. But yeah, you got the spot right, Frank. That's where they are. They're the biggest towers out in the swamp, and it's kind of neat. I've been out there. I don't know how many times I've been at that transmitter site. Quite a few times. And I guess they may still have the audio rolled off. They were running HD radio for a while, but they turned it off, like so many people on AM have at this point. WABC turned it off because they said it wasn't enough to make a difference. And they were interfering with their own WJR in Detroit, which was on 760. But anyway, so that's the deal. Bruce has got that almost right. If you want to read up on that, I believe the site, and they can check it and email you if this is wrong. It's a site called oldradiohistory.org. And the paper you want to pull up there's something called the development of the directional array, and it runs down a whole bunch of stuff. WOR originally had a complaint possibly against WLW because they're next door on 700. If you remember WLW was the only broadcast station in this country ever to be issued license to run 500 kilowatts, and they did. I think for 5 years, which hardly seemed worth the effort, but that rig is still out at WLW's transmitter site. But they ran 500 kW, covered half of the United States. And the problem they had, and by the way, you were right about the station in Florida. The problem WLW had was when they cranked the 500 kilowatt rig on, they wiped out the station on 690 in Canada. They put up 2 towers to null the signal down to the equivalent of what would be a 50 kilowatt signal in Canada, and that solved the problem. But that was where they started to develop directional rays, because you're right that the station in Florida was interfering with another station, and at the time all the stations were non-directional, so they started playing around with directional rays, and there you have it. Anyway, yeah, as it happens, I don't know all the transmitter sites out with that. I can tell you about some of them, but if you look off, if you pass the OR site, if you look off in the distance, or if you've ever gone to medieval times, there's a 4-tower array in Bach, right across the street from medieval times, and that's WINF. So that's an interesting transmitter site. They really they take much further up the building. And up the other end, you'll see the site with one big tower and then little towers around it. That's WDVR. It's a very nice site too. But anyway, DVR is interesting because they have a complete backup to the studio out the transmitter. So if they lost the studio in Manhattan, they could move operations out to the swampland out there and continue. But they've even got a third contingency of if both the studio and the transmitter don't building or under Belleville. I think they had a 10-kilowatt rig out at one of the towers. You can go probably hear from out there. Don't ask, I don't know. Anyway, over to you, Bruce. Over to you. W2XR and the gang. This is W2FNQ.
I thought I would drag my feet as well to see if David was in there. W2FNQ and the group. This is W2XR. Good stuff. Good stuff indeed. I think we all had similar boyhoods growing up with this fascination of radio. My mother used to listen to WOR. I personally only listened to it to hear Gene Shepard on in the evening. His call was K2ORS, if anybody is not aware of that. I'm sure you guys knew that. He was a long-term ham, Gene Shepard. My mother used to listen to Rambling with Gambling, John Gambling. I haven't heard that name in years there, Frank. But the stations I used to listen to when I was a kid, you know, back in the days of the 6 and 9 transistor radios, I listened to WABC. I listened to 1010 Winds, New York. I listened to WMCA, and at night, which is what I always found to be the coolest thing of all, I used to listen to WKBW out of Buffalo to hear these stations coming in from 500 miles away in the wintertime, or in the summer, of course. So those were the stations I used to listen to. And my dad used to listen in the car. Well, at home, my parents used to listen mostly to WQXR, and that's really the call. WQXR is what W2XR had morphed into. Another reason why I wanted this call W2XR, aside from the historical significance of it. But my dad used to listen in the car when he wasn't listening to WQXR. He used to listen to WNEW. And they were on 1130, and I think they're now WBBR, you know, Bloomberg Radio. And he used to listen to a radio show called Clavin and Finch, Gene Clavin, and I can't remember what Finch's first name was. But my dad would be hysterical listening to those guys. And my dad really wasn't one to laugh that much, but long story short, he found those guys to be hysterical, particularly Gene Clavin. And when Finch took an early retirement, Clavin continued the show by himself, I think until 1984, 1985, thereabouts, and then he retired from radio. But anyway, yeah, and WLW, Jerry and I have had long conversations in the past about WLW, the 500 kilowatt nation station on 700 kilohertz. And Jerry, you're right. I remember that. They had to add the two elements on either side of that enormous Blah-Knox tower to control the pattern when they went 500 kilowatts, which I think they did in 1934 through 1939. You're right. There was a 5-year period. And what that transmitter actually was, it wasn't a brand new transmitter per se. Rather, it used the existing 50 kilowatt transmitter that they had, which I think was an RCA. And it was driven, of course, by that 50 kilowatt RCA, had 10 dB of power gain, had its own external plate modulator. The transmitter, or for lack of a better term, the afterburner, if you want to call it that, it was built by a consortium of RCA, GE, and Westinghouse. If I remember correctly, RCA built the RF portion. Westinghouse built all of the control and protective circuitry. And GE, I think, may have built the audio portion, which included the enormous plate modulator. And when they first got that transmitter on the air, they had all kinds of problems. It would constantly blow itself off the air. They'd hit a modulation peak, the transmitter would blow off. I think they had some problems neutralizing it as well. But after a couple of months, the engineers really started to understand the subtleties of that transmitter and were able to make the appropriate revisions to the design. and it became quite stable. The transmitter would operate days on end without any technical issues, which is quite amazing. The only reason why WLW was forced to shut that transmitter down was because in 1939, the FCC was concerned that the Germans may conceivably use it as a homing beacon, if you will, into the United States. After the war, Crosley Broadcasting, who owned WLW, petitioned the FCC to go back to the 500 kilowatt operating power multiple times, and every time their petition was denied. And that was the end of 500 kilowatt AM standard broadcast here in the United States. It was continued down in Mexico. Wolfman Jack broadcast from, what do they call them? Border blasters, I think they were called. 250 kilowatt plate modulated transmitters. And then, of course, the technology was much more mature, and those transmitters were quite reliable. And I think the bulk of them were actually built by Continental. RCA had dropped out of that, and so did Gates, so did Collins. Anyway, the other thing is, like you had said before, Frank, you're right. There is no substitute for headroom. I've tried to design everything here so nothing comes anywhere as close on any kind of an audio peak to saturating that particular section of the station here, and that's another reason why your signal and Jerry's signal and mine, I think, are so free of that annoying IMD characteristic. But anyway, okay, over she comes to you, Frank. Let's take a pause and see if David is back from his supper. W2SDR and the group. This is W2XR, Long Island, New York.
I'm back. We don't have 500 kilowatts. Go ahead, Frank, and pass it to me.
Okay, David, welcome back. W2SDR and the group. Well, I don't know where to start. Border radio. Yeah, that was, if you're a rock and roll fan, border radio was the thing, man. They play stuff that they couldn't play here. And with tremendous signals, were able to be heard over here. But that was before my time, really. I'm 67. And that stuff was really, I guess, late 50s, early 60s. And I don't recall being able to hear those stations up here in the Philadelphia area. Let me see what else. W2XR, of course, that's a classical FM radio station now in New York. And I listen to them on a regular basis. I stream them here. Of course, most of the stations today also stream on the internet. And I listen to them on a regular basis. I'm a classical music buff, as well as all kinds of music, but I have their app on my smartphone that I can Bluetooth over to my stereo. So I listen to them on a regular basis, W2XR. They're very, very good station. Well, back in the rock and roll days, of course, WINS, Alan Freed, Moondog, he was really set the standard for rock and roll back in those days. I guess it's also, I think WINS has the reputation of being the oldest all-new station in the country. Now, I guess they went over to that in the mid-'60s, but before that, they were groundbreaking with Alan Freed. Well, WKBW that you had mentioned, Bruce, I went to college up at Alfred University in the southern tier of upstate New York. And KB Radio 1520 was the local rock and roll station. We would get them, even though they were 80 miles away. They were very powerful. And that was a station we listened to for rock and roll back in the days I went to school between 1969 and 73 up there. 1520 KB Radio, WKBW in Buffalo. Man, this is really bringing back things that I haven't thought of in many, many years. Of course, WLW, the Blawnox towers were so cool. They are really cool. I guess they were made in Blawnox in western Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, if I recall. They were manufactured. And I got that information about WOR from radiolocator.com or whatever it is. You can just search on that website and find all their patterns and what power they run and their longitude and latitude and everything on radio-locator.com, which is a lot of information. Somebody mentioned WJR 760 in in Detroit. My ex-wife was from Detroit. Used to listen to that station a lot. Very good signal. They use Wheatstone equipment for broadcast processors, I understand, which is very pleasant to listen to. Some of these talk radio stations are very aggressive, but they have very smooth, laid-back type of audio. And I understand they use the Wheatstone AM broadcast processors. Gene Shepard, of course. Yep, Christmas Story, the whole bit. Ham radio operator. And I remember Gene. I worked him, I think, once or twice maybe on the ham radio bands back in the day. Okay, I think I commented on just about everything. Over to you, David. W9, hope you enjoyed your dinner. N9PVF, I'm sorry. W2SDR in the group.
Yeah, okay. W2SDR and N9PVF in the group. Well, I once looked up Wolfman Jack after seeing whatever that movie was featured in it. And I guess that actually they had excerpts of his voice. But the stuff I found very interesting was when they came out with a movie about pirate radio. And back in the days, Patrick McGoon, when he was like a James Bond wannabe, but he was much cooler. No high-tech stuff in most cases. And there was a episode about pirate radio. And I like that. So, people wanting to hear what they want to hear and governments wanting to block that is always an interesting study in sociology. Is that the correct term? Maybe even psychology. But you guys moving in here. Last time I checked, the Ranger is dead nuts on its frequency, but, it's a Radio Shack frequency counter. So, Bruce, I apologize if it makes your feelings detector go nuts. So I'm going to take a chance and pass it over to Jerry, and if Jerry's gone, it goes to W2XR. And N9PVF to go.
out there, but I'm just trying to get some stuff in there.
Shut that down and use it at the radio museum, but never did. So now the AM now is owned by Family Radio. What's your favorite? Hold on, it's all right in
Cutting the cotton beams around just a little bit. Hello, Mustang, look a controller right back in your radio, baby.
Boy, I haven't heard that one in a long time. Wow. W2FNQ and the group from W2XR. Yeah, ain't too many amateur radio stations that can claim that they have a station ID that was recorded by Gene Shepard, the late Gene Shepard, K2ORS. Very cool. Yeah, the transmitter that WLW used to excite the big 500 kilowatt rig, it just came back into my mind. It was built by Western Electric. And the reason why I recalled that, Jer, is you had mentioned that on the Millennium they put one of their original rigs on the air from the, I guess would have to be from the late 20s, early 30s, and that was a Western Electric transmitter. God knows where the hell they get the tubes for that thing at this point. That's probably why they only run it every couple of years, I would assume. But that was the exciter to the big 500 kilowatt plate modulated transmitter. And WNEW was an interesting station too. They were the first station in a major market to have women announcers. Back in the probably the mid to late 1960s, probably closer to the mid 1960s, and that's where Allison Steele cut her teeth on WNEW AM. The other two ladies they got rid of, and they said to Allison, well, maybe you'd like to go to work on our FM outlet, WNEW FM, New York. And, of course, the Nightbird became something of a legend going forward. I used to listen to her all the time on WNEW-FM. That was a great radio station. That was a great radio station. I actually had the good fortune to meet Allison Steele in person, and Scott Muni as well. Both very, very nice people. She was a nice-looking woman, and a very, very nice woman, too. Alan Freed originally cut his teeth, I think, at a station in Cleveland, Ohio. And like Frank said, he moved over to WINS 1010. And what killed Alan Freed, of course, was payola. And in 1959, once the payola scandals hit AM radio, that was the end of his career. He never was able to get back into radio as far as I know, and he died at a relatively young age. I think he died of alcoholism. I think he died at like age 48 or 49 or something like that. And there's a fellow who I used to know, he was actually a good friend of mine, who unfortunately had passed away about a year and a half ago, who had crossed paths with Alan Freed. And he said that everything about Alan Freed was about, you know, what can I get in return? And my friend related the fact that this guy, Alan Freed, wanted a built-in swimming pool in return for promoting some record label or something like that. The details escape me at this point, but not a nice guy. You're right, Frank. They were the first station, I think, in a major market to go all news all of the time. 1010 Wins New York, around 1965, 1966. Because I remember listening to Murray the K and the Swingin' Soiree on 1010 Wins New York well into 1964. That's when I pretty much started to listen to AM radio. I was about 10 years old at that point. And I had the good fortune, Frank, to visit WKBW's transmitter site. You mentioned you went to school in Alfred, New York. I went to school up around Rochester. And one Saturday, myself and my roommate, we didn't have much to do. So I said, you want to take a ride over to this really well-known radio station in the Buffalo area? He wasn't a ham. He really wasn't into it or anything like that. He said, sure. So he had a car. And I knew the transmitter was in Hamburg, which is right off the New York State Thruway. And there were several exits for Hamburg in the Buffalo area. So there it was. You couldn't miss it, of course. Pardon me. Couldn't miss it. So we drive up to the transmitter site, knock on the door. Very friendly engineer greets us. Told him I'm a radio ham. Could I take a look at the transmitter? He said, sure, come on in. As I remember, it was the big 50-kilowatt Westinghouse. Jerry knows the model number. One of the nicest-looking 50-kilowatt plate-modulated AM broadcast transmitters ever made. And they still retain the original mercury vapor rectifier tubes. That was the coolest thing to see. And the transmitter site was beautiful. They had the transmitter sitting on this elevated platform with a terrazzo floor with a chrome-plated railing around the radius of the raised floor. It was a work of art. I mean, that transmitter site was built when they would occasionally take clients out to the transmitter site to impress them with, you know, how sophisticated and technically advanced their transmitter was and all the accoutrements and the other apparatus and whatnot. But that was really something to see. But what was also really interesting was the directional array at WKBW was fed with open wire transmission line. They had like the kinds of telephone poles you'd see alongside railroad tracks with those kinds of glass insulators that supported the open wire feeders to each of the driven elements. And if you guys want to hear really good quality AM audio, listen to 860. It's a Canadian station, French Canadian. Maybe listen probably right now. You'd be able to pick them up. I think that is the benchmark for technical quality for AM broadcast. And the movie, David, that you were thinking about with Wolfman Jack was American Graffiti. And at that time, he was actually broadcasting from XERA, which was one of the border blasters, I think in Monterrey, Mexico. Or maybe it was in Tijuana. I can't remember. No, it was on the other side of the Texas border, I believe. But somebody would have to double-check that. XERA. 250 kilowatts, plate modulated. I think it was a Continental transmitter. And on the subject of Patrick McGowan, the TV series he was in was called Secret Agent in the early 1960s. But what was the name of the TV show he was in the early 70s, where they were stationed on some little island, and the show would open up with this like balloon coming out of the water and capturing people who were trying to escape from the island? It was a classic show. I loved that show. I think there were only something like 13 or 14 episodes, but maybe somebody remembers the name of it. W2SDR and the group. This is W2XR, and please excuse that rather lengthy transmission.
That's okay. AM, W2XR, XR in the groove, W2SDR. 2 Manhattans down the hatch. Yeah, I don't know where to start. Okay, I guess my first, way back when I was just a little boy with DXing and radio was AM DXing on my little GE clock radio in my bedroom. Just at nighttime when I'd go to bed, the little the sleep knob you had on it. When you go to bed, I had a clock radio in there, and I'd tune around at night and get distant stations. And that's how I got started, I guess, in the hobby with my little GE 5-tube Wonder clock radio. Well, classical stations have taken a beating, Jerry. I guess QXR, I didn't know any of that history. You guys are a wealth of information. The classical stations in Philadelphia were disappeared for a while. Now, WRTI, which is an FM station of Temple University, has their HD2 is classical all the time. So finally, there's if you have an HD radio, or now with the internet, obviously, you can stream classical music anytime you want it. But it's taken a beating there for a while over the years. And I guess because it's a niche market, but I always liked it. But the classical 24-hour stations in Philadelphia disappeared quite a number of years ago, on terrestrial radio. Family radio. I guess family radio is religious programming, right? Well, when I went to school at Alfred, I guess KB was the big station. And also there was a station in Rochester. I can't remember the call letters. I believe it was 98.9. Bruce, if you remember what that used to be in the late 60s or early 70s. That was rock, too. And I put up my fraternity house, a FNQ FM antenna on the roof of their fraternity house so I could get that station in Rochester really good. Because, Rochester was a good 70 miles or so plus from Alfred, and you really couldn't get it dependably unless you had an antenna. So being the ham that I was, I put up a FNQ FM Yagi on the roof of the fraternity house so I can get 98.9. I can't remember the call letters right now, but they had rock music. So between that and KB radio. I just tuned to 860 on my second receiver here. They're broadcasting in French right now. Now, I don't know whether that's a station in Canada or not, but there's a French-speaking station right now on 860. I've listened to them before. It's been quite some time because sometimes I don't get them really well here. Let me see. I'll keep it moving because there's quite a few guys in here. So I'll keep it going around. I'm going to turn it to you, David. N9PVF in the group W2SDR. Hope the band's holding up.
Well, you guys have been getting stronger and stronger and stronger. You keep turning the RF gain down on the hammer one. You got to figure out your EGC and get much better audio out of it. So, when I was 12, where I was kind of learning about ham radio in preparation for novice, they took us to a visit of a place that did, I think the station is still there. I met somebody a couple years ago who knew about it. But it was a 5-kilowatt AM station, and they had the most beautiful big tubes behind these glass doors. I was just entranced, and they had these big 6-foot by 4-foot speakers that were like bass reflex, and you could hear what was being transmitted. It sounded great. That's when I got motivated to build my own speakers, and I did all Dynakits originally. All for money I earned shoveling snow, somewhere between $2 and $5 between a walkway and a driveway. I also got bitten by the bug. My dad just 38. He gave it to me. He had to have the caps replaced, and I used to do broadcast band reaction. Then it finally started yelling at me if I was staying up past 2 o'clock in the morning, so I don't do that anymore. But as far as I ever got from Staten Island was into Utah. And I still have an FM Yankee in the basement because I bought one when I went to Ithaca because I was trying to get all these FM stations in Syracuse and Rochester. Man, it didn't quite work out as well as I was hoping. And Frank's right, it's too easy to stream it anymore. So lots of things. So, Bruce, the follow-on to Secret Agent was The Prisoner, and I've actually stumbled on to, it's like channel 38-4, and I can't tell you who is distributing it, but a completely different version of either The Secret Agent or The Prisoner. Maybe it's the one you're talking about. And even Patrick, what is it, The Avengers. Who did they have? It was kind of the Marilyn Monroe look-alike who had a mole on her lower left side of her face. Oh, she's hot when she was like 17 or 18. And of course, there's always Anne Francis in The Forbidden Planet. I actually saw her on a very early Twilight Zone, 1961. Netflix has all the Twilight Zones that I've never seen, so they were all the very first year. As you said, there were a lot of people, Frank. No, what should I say, long-winded BS. W2FNQ, turn on the afterburners. N9PVF.